It's kind of fun. There it is. I was like, I know I have. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We don't have a ton of stuff on the agenda. I wanted to spend the lion's share of the agenda, kind of setting up something for the budget framework discussion. So let's go around and introduce ourselves since we have so many folks here. I'm Jeff Goldman, Chief Innovation Officer. Go to my left.
Atlanta, Alliance for Workforce Development.
Robin Jones, supervisor of the adult unit.
Houston Clay Information.
Lola Becerra, Alliance for Workforce Development. Amanda Dowd, administrative analyst, UV, and at the Sheriff's Office Corrections.
Molly Bachluba, senior analyst with the Sheriff's Office.
Aaron, excuse me, CFAO for the Sheriff's Office.
Bob Jacobs, Captain of Corrections, Sheriff's Office.
Ryan Boover, Health and Human Services Director.
Paul Litchfield, probation.
Jeremy Vance, probation.
Aaron Butler, County Executive Office.
Kelly Corcoran, analyst in the CEO's office.
In Boston, Nevada City PD.
Rachel Pena with Social Services. And I have with me Tyler Titan Chu, who is a CEO intern. Thank you. Intern with our CEO's office. So
Kristen.
Hi, Kristen Plant with Social Services.
Jody Tucker with Truckee Probation.
Last names.
Steve Johnson with Grass Valley PD.
All right, thanks. So let's get on with the introduction. So roll call, we had 4 voting members. So we have a quorum. Public comment. Let's see any folks for public comment. So skip that. First thing, approval of past meeting minutes. So we have April 23rd, May 21st, and June 4th. So if someone wants to make a motion either together or separate to approve those meeting minutes, that would be great. Someone, one of the exec members. April 23rd, May 21st, June 4th. That's good job. Second, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstain? Hearing none, motion carries. All right. I had innovation fund follow-up, if I remember correctly. Didn't have a whole lot. I was out this morning and then I had an interview this morning. So if I recall correctly, where we left off is we awarded those funds at a lower rate, but we hadn't talked to each group whether they accepted those funds or not. Is that correct? Whether they be willing to accept a lower amount? Am I right?
Steering.
Huh?
Are you staring at everybody?
You did.
You just approved them, right? You made the motion.
You did accept.
I know, but we didn't know that at the last meeting.
No, we did not.
Okay, yes. So yes, they both accepted. One of them had asked about changing some things around, and what they asked about changing, I didn't feel comfortable because it wasn't what was presented to the group. So I said no, and they were fine with that. So unless they wanted to come back and change it, but it was too it's too big of an item, actually, how they wanted to change it, that it wasn't not in the spirit of what was presented. So that's why I said that. So any questions about the innovation funds?
Does that mean they're not getting any money or they're going back to their original?
They went back to what they presented to the group.
Is that Crow's Nest?
Crow's Nest, yeah. So essentially Crow's Nest had talked about if they got less funds, they would hire a Spanish speaking clinician. And then they asked, hey, can we change that up and buy a vehicle for transportation, for having transportation issues? So, well, that seems a lot different than hiring a clinician, you know, and so they went back to the clinician. So, and stick with that. Any questions about that? All right. Data update. We're still, think one of the interviews I was in this morning was to hire an analyst for probation. So we still have that position vacant. We have a couple second interviews today, so hopefully in the next week or so, we will hire an analyst and be able to provide some more robust updates relative to the realignment population. So that was all I had for that. And so the main part that I wanted to talk about today was schedule and discuss budget framework discussion. And so we had a couple of discussions relative to like, we need more time to have a discussion relative to how we're going to approach fund balance and how we're going to approach the innovation fund and how we're going to approach like asks for funding and all those different things that go along with the budget. So I'd like to take this time. I mean, I don't think we'll get through all of it today, but if we don't, at the end, I'd like to set a date and time and amount of time that we need to discuss these items. And maybe today, just use the time to discuss like what topics we would like to try to cover during that meeting. So we have an idea of how long it would take and any sort of extra information we need to help make those decisions. So what's out there right now is the LAO did a report on realignment that might be helpful in this discussion. CJCJ, which I think is the Center for Juvenile and Criminal Justice, did a paper on, I think it was about a year or two ago, on the way that CCPs spend their funds and kind of some feedback on that. We have the Diane Cummings kind of history of realignment and the funding document that might be helpful in that discussion. I've had one of our support staff kind of compile the spending of all the different counties and where that sits and kind of the percentages and the breakdowns of all those that we can look at relative to how other counties are spending their funds. And I think that's about it. Maybe, I mean, the other piece is, I think it's sometimes lost that the majority of the growth funds, when we're talking about kind of metrics around funding, the majority of the growth funds that we get are the main basis for those are the same things that we get our $678, which 678 was the precursor to realignment and it was in 2009 that created the CCP before 2011 realignment even came around. And so some of those metrics that we have in 678 around performance are the same metrics that feed into that growth fund for 2011 realignment. So those might be good to look at relative to what we're trying to achieve to increase that growth fund. So.
Can I just ask what the objectives are? What are the goals of these that you're trying to frame up?
So I think, I mean, that's what we're discussing now, but I think we always have these discussions around like when we get to the funding part, we have these discussions of, well, this is how we've done in the past, or what should we do with the fund balance? You know, should we maintain a certain amount? Should we spend it down? Should we have a set amount? Like all these other side things about kind of not the actual budget item or the ask, but around all the pieces that have to do with the budget. So I think it would be good to have those discussions and then kind of frame them now that I mean, it's been a couple of years now, but since we did the strategic plan and these are things that we want to focus on to see if those things still realign. Yeah.
Did the innovation fund has taken a couple of iterations over the last couple of years, and I don't know if that, maybe I missed a meeting or so, but getting some kind of framework that's kind of cemented in so it doesn't bounce, you know, back and forth, I think would also be proportionate and how it relates to the overall budget as well.
Yeah, and a lot of this, I mean, all of this, like the innovation funds, for instance, like some of the things that get funded out of innovation funds really don't always have a direct service impact on probation, but we manage those funds. So it's helpful, like we manage the contract, we manage all the pieces that go around it. So it's helpful, I think, like you were saying, to have some of those frameworks so that, you know, when Angie's going through this process, because she's the one handling most of the stuff, that she knows kind of what the parameters are around those things. And maybe I'm totally off base. So if people think we don't need this discussion, then that's a whole nother thing. But I think there needs to at least be some discussion about fund balance and some of those things that are out there, and how we're going to spend it, because we have been spending either right at budget or a little over recently. So I mean, it's not like our fund balance is going to disappear immediately. I mean, there's some counties that are on track in the next 3 to 4 years to be out of fund balance because they're spending over so much, you know, at such a high rate. So I think it's probably better to have those conversations before we get to those points than if we're like, oh, we're out of fund balance and now we've created something that's unsustainable. I'm not saying that's what track we're on, but I think it's good to have those conversations before we get to those points.
You know, I don't think it's ever a bad idea to look at our budget and make sure we're in line where we're at. I would like to see, you know, more comparable counties as opposed to just, you know, comparing us to Sacramento County or even Placer County, counties that are around 100,000, as opposed to grabbing LA County and seeing what they're doing with it.
Yeah. So we have all of them.
And it's all public record too.
Yeah, and they categorize them in different ways, but so yeah, we can slice it up however we want, whether it's by population, by region, whatever we want to do, to try to get that picture.
I don't think it's bad just because, as I think one of the newer members in here, it does seem like every time something comes up, it's like we're starting from scratch again. And it would be nice if it was just like you said, okay, here is what we have. This is how we should be spending it. We shouldn't be every time we're looking to spend any money, like, all right, let's take this to a vote and talk about what it is. And everybody's like, what is it exactly? Because it seems like that's what we do a lot. So.
And you could talk in the past of your experience of like I mean, not to speak for you, but you had mentioned like talking about spending more money to outside entities outside government.
Yeah.
Because that was your experience at a different.
I mean, yeah, but I will freely say that's my experience. I don't think that county exactly fits this county. And that's a little bit my experience, but also my belief. So less than my experience, just what I believe the law was intended to do. And when I read it, that's what I think it was supposed to be. But I also think, like, I don't have hard feelings over it, but I do that gets into a whole nother thing where I just think that some of the best services we do have is when we have excellent nonprofits that government's working with. That's where I think we get the best results. So I'll always advocate for that, but I don't think the room has the same sentiment on that, which I understand sometimes. But if we just went over the budget and tried to iron out some things that are, so we're not fighting over it every time. I do agree with it completely. But yeah, I would always advocate for more funds. When you read the law, in my opinion, it's very clearly states like this is supposed to be for innovative funds, as well as a lot of it would go right to the sheriff's department because they captured a lot of the impact from it from when the measure passed.
Yeah, I mean, I guess another piece to add on to that is that, at least from my perspective, a lot of this stuff was decided in that the direction that we started to go was set 15 years ago, and a lot of things have changed in the last 15 years. So it's probably a good time to readdress some of those things. And, you know, in looking at some of the criticisms that are in some of those documents that I mentioned, some of that is like, there's no consistency, there's no transparency, like there's no change in the way, like, you know, as dynamics change in the environment that realignment exists, there hasn't been a lot of shift in the way that the funding has occurred. So like looking at all those things and trying to address as many of those kind of criticisms as we can relative to making sure that we at least address those. And it doesn't mean we're changing anything. It might be that, yes, we see that and that's what currently works for us and we're, you know, staying the course or whatever it is. So.
Those criticisms though are more like statewide, right? They're not specific
Yeah.
necessarily to Nevada County.
Right.
So it seems like we should probably vet whether it applies to our agency first.
Yeah,
Before we
well,
do
that's what I'm saying, it's like, we'll look at it and it might not, we might want to stay the course. I mean, I know there was some audits. Like 3 or 4 counties that they audited directly as well. I think the smallest one might have been Mendocino County. That had some criticisms as well, but may or may not apply to us.
I wonder if to really approach this holistically in a way that kind of gets all of us to a level baseline, we might take, maybe 3 to 5 different sections and over the course of several meetings, focus in on one at a time and start with, okay, so if we're going to talk about the LAO realignment report, let's prep that. Let's have kind of a brief summary of what that was and what was found, discuss how that applies for us, and then determine if there's any policy decisions that this group wants to set for how we're going to operate in that context. And then maybe move on to the next one, just to kind of create a little bit of structure, because I think the freewheeling kind of reset every time that we've been experiencing is hard for a group of this size to come to any particular decision point. Not intended as a criticism. This happens in so many groups all the time.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the point of this, is trying to.
Yeah.
To corral some of this in, but yeah, after, 15 years of saying, takes a little effort to turn it around.
There was some discussion in previous meetings about some of the intent behind the initial realignment. And I know you mentioned Diane's document. I know there's also, she's done some like webinar stuff on that. And I know it's on like CPOC's website, but I don't know if that's like behind the wall where, yeah, the on demand, but is that something that, I mean, I know sometimes it's kind of easier to listen to something that's playing in the background on your computer while you're working rather than reading. I don't know, that was a pretty big document. Do you have any idea if that's something available?
She does CSAT stuff as well, I think, right? I mean, I think that might be more encompassing of multiple realignments than just.
It's broken down. I watched the one that was 1990. Yeah, but I actually haven't finished the one that was particularly for 2011 realignment.
So yeah, maybe we look at it like in a chronological order, obviously, like I kind of look at Diane's document being the starting point, because that's like the basis of realignment happening, and then chronologically as the documents came out, maybe that's the best way to look at it, and have those discussions.
You're speaking my language. I can't wait to read the history of California finances.
We should teach the class.
I think having that healthy understanding of the baseline and establishing those parameters so that we're all playing from the same set of music as we try to establish some process around this would be helpful. To Dan's point, that there's like dual purposes of realignment. One of them was the actual costs associated with having the people that used to be at the state being served at the county. So that falls on probation and the jail, and to a lesser extent, the PDs. Then public defenders and DAs get allocations outside of maybe 1 and 9 for that purpose. And then beyond that, it's sort of the broader system investments to reduce recidivism and keep people out of state prison. And that's where we have, I feel like, a much more wiggle room. But we have to make sure we're keeping pace with the expenses of serving people that aren't the state, that used to be a state responsibility and are now ours. That to me seems like the most central baseline there.
Yeah, just for some background, I mean, she has said that 2 things. One, when I say they, the governor's office wanted to make it so there was enough, that it wasn't so prescriptive that people would push back a time to realignment. So that was one of like, basically, that's why there's not a lot of framework to it, is that they needed this thing to pass or move forward and counties be accepting of it. So they knew that if they put too many bumpers around it, then counties would push back a lot more. So that's why it is pretty free flow. And then two, she has said that the governor was pretty set on not providing enough money to lock folks, to continue, like all the people that were released from prison, to allow them to be able to, from that money, to be able to afford for them to be in jail in an attempt to try to push the changes in the supervision status or the supervision approaches to realignment. So they underfunded it in that, with that kind of idea. So and those are just two things to keep in mind, at the history of it.
So if we were gonna do it, Jeff, I mean, like any budget, there's probably, it's a decent sized budget, but there's not a lot of wiggle room anyway. Most of it's eaten up, and then a lot of we're just talking about that small percentage of the wiggle room part. It seems to me every time we come here, the things that come up a lot is how much of a reserve do we want to maintain all the time? That's one of the constant topics. I think we should iron that out maybe a little bit. What do we consider a healthy reserve and where do we want to keep it? I know some people, I'm one of them, is concerned that if we keep it too big, the state's going to take it back sooner or later. So I think that should be probably factored into our budget. I don't think anybody's mentioned what we believe to be a healthy reserve. I don't think anything would think that our 5-year reserve is healthy. I think that's overly healthy, too healthy, too fat. And then just maybe on those smaller items, I mean, it looks like we have a good mission statement, which I've never been read, but I read it now, it's fine, like guiding principles. And if we just went back to the basics and said, hey, is our budget matching what we have here already? And if we want to do any adjustments there, it shouldn't be too difficult, I wouldn't think, right? But even, we keep bringing it up, the innovation fund, we all know it's not even an innovation fund anymore because some people are allowed to resubmit, after, so that's not innovation, that's just, I would be curious first, how much funds are we even talking about? Because that there is wiggle room on. Some of it is immediately not right, like right off the top. So
well, yeah, and I think that's,
and we're going back to all the way to that. That's
that's what you're saying. The first part, I think, is the low hanging fruit of like the innovation fund, the fund balance, those sorts of things. But I do think, like, not to ruin the plot line for people that want to read all these documents, but the most common criticism is like kind of not a whole lot of change I should say innovation, get confused with innovation fund, but not kind of re-looking at like how things are going, how things are working, and doing kind of a performance-based budgeting relative to the things that are already been budgeted for the same 15 years. I'm not saying like, yes, that's already eaten up by probation. And so probation just gets the same amount every year, but probation says, yes, this is working, or this not working, or caseloads have gone way down, or whatever has occurred, and those get readdressed as we go through the budget.
so you are talking about a full. Okay, I see.
So that seems like a bigger objective,
Well,
but
that's what I'm saying. That's the low hanging fruit. Probably we could do easily.
I was just gonna bring up, I like the idea of the conversation on the fund balance, but I think some of the drivers generally for fund balance discussion, Aaron could probably speak to this better than I could, but is that the county does have a fund balance policy. And I think that from my observation anyways, the CCP has been operating within that fund balance policy. Now, whether that is like required guidance for the CCP or not, I don't know, and would defer to Aaron on that. But for example, the fund balance policy says, it should be used for one-time expenses generally, and not for operating costs generally. So when we present our budgets to CCP for consideration at the end of every year, calendar year, I think that like we have always looked at it from what Angie tells us is the amount that we have expected in operating revenues for realignment coming into CCP and not including any consideration of the existing fund balance. So, and then whether, you know, if there's more growth than was anticipated, that's fantastic. That goes into the fund balance and it's not used, like, we don't get any, the jail doesn't get any consideration for the 50% of what actually comes in, right? Plus or minus. So hopefully on average, it averages out over time. But I think that's a big question. Like, are we required to abide by the fund balance policy that the county has adopted, the board of supervisors has adopted or not? And what does that look like, right? Because
Is CCP required?
that's what I'm saying. I would think
Well,
so,
I
but
think-
I'm not positive.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but county supervisors are the ultimate approval of CCP budget, but this board recommends the budget, right? I know the state, you could have zero left over every year, because some CCPs do, correct, Jeff? Some spend every dollar they have.
Yeah, and some are,
So they have zero reserve. But I think, could the county say, no, we're not gonna do that? I don't really know.
so the
They
county,
could,
I mean,
they could, but they couldn't tell you how to spend it. They could just approve it or not.
the county doesn't.
Right.
The board of Supes doesn't approve, but they can not approve by a 4/5 vote. That's the way that it's written into the section.
But it's a special revenue fund within the county, it's a budgeted line items, like in order for money to go even to an outside entity, it would have to have the county's budget authority to come out of the probation budget. So I think it is within the purview of the fund balance policy, but the fund balance policy doesn't have teeth, it's more like guidelines. And so it would be more of a, like, board is concerned that you're not prudently managing your fund balance, and so we're gonna vote down the plan and kick it back to CCP. So I think it falls within that as much as any other special revenue fund.
But I also think like, I mean, even to your point of, okay, you guys always come within the, whatever the projected revenue is. But let's say, I think it would be good, so we don't have to have the discussion a million times of like, okay, let's say you have a one-time project that you think fits. And we want to spend down, like,
Yeah.
one, that we want to keep it at a certain amount, and two, like, what is the mechanism? Is that, again, through like the innovation process, or is that through another ask? And I think where the innovation discussion went last time was like, oh, if it's something new, but I would hate like if, you know, a new case law for pretrial comes along, maybe that would happen. And it quadruples the number of people out that I would have to go to an innovation fund versus like, it's like the rules have changed. And now, you know, the caseloads have quadrupled or whatever. Like, I would rather not have to go through this as like, oh, this is new, so I'm limited to the innovation fund versus the other avenue, because it's just statutory issues that came along and have increased caseloads or increased the number of people in detention or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you. I think my point is just bringing up the like, in terms of framework idea, right? Like, are you looking at drawing down fund balance for operating costs or for one-time uses / capital expenses or something? I don't know. Just putting that out there as that's not, at least in principle, as Brian said, sort of guidelines, right? That policy already exists for the counties.
I think there's two opportunities too. If you've gone through the last 15 years of allocating funds based on an estimate of revenue and never adjusted for actual revenue, that's why your fund balance is so high. So you could argue that a lot of that fund balance could have been used for operations. And I think you've got an opportunity now to possibly change going forward how you adjust for actuals. If that's a percentage of your budget, if that gets incorporated into the future year budget as excess proceeds, like there's a couple different ways that you could capture the difference between what's estimated and what actually comes in. There's also an opportunity for you all to include in your application for funding every year. I want to use fund balance for X. I want to buy a new car. I need a new software, whatever. But specify in the application that you're proposing to use fund balance so that it's not coming out of your operational amount. I think you do need to spend down your fund balance. I think it's too high. Is there a law that says what the right number is? Absolutely not. You all need to decide what the right number is based on what you're spending and your comfort level. And I wouldn't recommend going to zero. And I wouldn't recommend keeping it where it's at. So what is the opportunity that you have to spend some of that? And do you want to spend it all at once, or do you want to spend it slowly over time? Those are the kind of consideration questions that I would throw to the group for discussion, if not this meeting, then a future meeting focused just on fund balance.
Just to be clear, I get asked to order a bar of that, so I'd like to make a motion.
I was gonna say, I feel like a lot of us can totally help you with this.
So,
We got you.
But you have to then
yeah, I get
figure
you.
out how to operate your car, pay for gas, and replace it.
Right, and then to that point, because like I think every department in this room could figure out how to spend like a big chunk of that money. And so I think the framework discussion would also benefit from the criteria that the CCP board would be, or, you know, the voting members would have to evaluate the proposals against, right? Like what are the guiding kind of criteria? And that we could also use to submit our proposals, like, does it meet that criteria?
I agree. I also think it's the strength of CCP that when it works well with a good group is it is funds that can be accessed quickly by agencies that say, hey, here's the need that's going to do some great things to prevent recidivism. And maybe it's not, you know, we haven't talked about this before, but there's a group of professionals in this room that go, that is an awesome idea. And this room has struggled with it more, I've noticed. And
I'm not sure exactly what you mean, Chief Boss, but like generally there's, you know, a timeline as far as when those proposals have to come before the CCP to get considered so that it can be rolled into the budget proposal that goes to the board for approval in June. So I, like what I heard you say sounded like maybe an open-ended process.
And
But I don't know that.
and maybe it's different in this county, but I wouldn't think that's necessarily the case if you have fund balance that could be used for capital or whatever you're gonna call it, and somebody comes in for.
The board still has to approve it, and so unless there was like, I mean, we do budget amendments that, like, there is a process for that, but it's not generally the way we operate is to have open-ended discussions about budget.
So-
Yeah.
I mean, either was fine. I mean, if we wanted to, I think it makes it more difficult, obviously, that's what it's trying to difficult, but that's the way it'd have to go, that's fine. But going back to your point, Jeff, we're getting back into where we were on, when we were talking about, instead of the fund, what do we call it? Innovative fund. It just seems to kind of get stuck in the gears. I think if we were gonna go this way, we would almost have to have a subcommittee or a small group that first comes up with a solid idea that, you know, experts that are on budget like you, that can answer some of these questions, say, okay, here's some guidelines, and bring us at least a base that then that big group can build off of, as opposed to.
Maybe that's kind of where the innovation fund, how it started, Angie and Georgette kind of came up with it, and then we screwed everything up after we.
And we did establish guidelines for that one, and they got thrown out the window.
Yeah.
But just to clarify too, for my knowledge, if somebody came, if Ryan came tomorrow and said, hey, I need $110,000 for this great idea that's coming forward. We have the funding for it, we have the balance for it, we're gonna call it this. Then we're saying we wouldn't be able to spend that money until next year's CCP budget, that we'd have to get approved through,
It has to be.
or go to a budget amendment.
Yes, go through, yeah, some type of process, or put it in front of the board for approval. So, and that just hasn't been the sort of standard operating practice that I've observed with CCP. Sort of like a one time a year. kind of-
Yeah, I would say it'd be more definitely one time a year, something, but
I like your idea of having, I do, to your point earlier, it's hard for a group of this size to come up with on spot productive ways to move forward without a lot of many meetings. And so the idea of creating like a subcommittee or something, or a working group that would formulate a plan and come back for consideration, and it could be thrown out the window. We'll go back to the drawing board, but I think that would be.
And that's, I mean, another piece of this could be the structure of the meetings, like. We tried this briefly, but a lot of counties do it to where there's the CCP and then there's the CCP exec. It's like divided into two meetings. You know, just flows a little bit differently. I mean, and that's another way to try to work through, you know, like funneling through to the smaller deciding parties to where there's, you know, the initial discussion and then the voting party meeting after that. It sounds to me like, at least what's coming out, I mean, whether this is a subgroup or the group as a whole, that like the low hanging fruit, not saying it's gonna be easy, will be the fund balance piece and the innovation funds. Those seem like the places to start first, rather than opening up the whole can and going through the whole process. I mean, those, which we've kind of done when we did the strategic planning and we talked about, you know, because it did used to be, you know, you didn't used to submit that piece of paper that says like, this is what we've done, this is what we're gonna do and all that kind of stuff. It used to be even less formal than that. So we've done a piece of that, but it seems like if we focused on those like two things, those might be something that seems to get us hung up the most currently. So I don't know if we want to do a subgroup of folks talking about those things while then bringing it back to the big group to where we have a more robust discussion, or if I don't want the subgroup to feel like, you know, they've done all this work and then we just go, you know, and change everything. So.
Well, if I may, I think going back to our data class that we all took as a group, one of the things that struck out to me was having a shared definition. And I mean, I've been sitting in these meetings for 2 years, and I think that the definitions of CCP that each individual agency has sort of changed, and what we think where money should be spent and has just changed. And so I think that if we're gonna have a meaningful discussion about budget, we also have to look back at our strategic plan to figure out if that budget is gonna support the strategic plan. And if those strategic plans need to change, then the budget needs to change with it. And so I'm not sure that you can have a meaningful discussion. Sure, we can address the low hanging fruit of fund balance and things like that, but I don't know that that would be able to be a meaningful conversation without making sure that the goal of CCP is aligned.
So geez, I appreciate that. I think if there's a subgroup might be a way to kind of start the conversation and get the ideas at least formulated into something that the full group could talk about. Another way we could approach it is we spend, 10 or 15 minutes in a couple subsequent meetings on a series of things. History of CCP and realignment is one. Local funding history and comparisons is another. Review of the strategic plan and guiding policy documents for CCP, another area, and then funding going forward. And we have kind of a series of questions there. What funds do we make decisions about? What funding choices might we want to reconsider? What do we consider a healthy fund reserve? And just kind of go piece by piece into these things. And like, this is the topic for today. So something like that might bring us to a level there.
I agree with you. I think one of the things that at times this meeting does suffer from is it's quarterly, right? And I think sometimes without it's hard to pick back up where the conversation was from, months ago, especially when it comes to more serious topics like, spending down the reserve and things like that, and kind of the thread of all of that. So I agree that breaking it down in smaller chunks is good, but to get through that might take a year if we're doing it still in this quarterly format.
So say that, it's a fantastic idea. For those conversations to be productive, some people need to do a lot of work to get to the point where you can actually have productive conversations.
Right, so we have to do the research,
Right.
presented something, yeah.
I would think even just looking at fund balance, looking at various cash flow scenarios of how much could you, draw down in any given year, and looking at various alternatives. Somebody needs to put those alternatives together. opinion, for anyone to have a productive conversation about it. Not without like saying this is all gonna fall to probation. I don't know how you could do it without some type of work group that would be a collaborative process so that it's not all in one department or one person.
Angie's not here though, I'll volunteer.
Yeah.
She doesn't know why.
Yeah.
Something I've heard mentioned a lot is the data piece, and when we're talking about innovation specifically, there's one program that involves recidivism, like, I need a car, and it's gonna really help with recidivism as cart before the horse, versus if you saw in the data, that transportation between something was one of the touch points that was generating recidivism, and so like, I think having that as part of that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think to everyone's point, I mean, having consistency in the same people, you know, participating in however we approach it. I think that's why it's sometimes seems like Groundhog's Day, because it's like we have 4 meetings. Sometimes there's not consistent, it's not always the same people. And different discussions occur, and then it's like, you know, we leave it at a point for the next meeting and then it starts over from scratch again. And yes, I've seen different iterations because, you know, fortunately or unfortunately, I've been here, I mean, been in the mix since it started. And I've seen it from initial iteration to, you know, different iterations, different counties. And not to say one way is better than the other, but I think, I mean, the ideas that I'm hearing is maybe it's a combination of like a subgroup that meets and kind of covers these topics, as well as, you know, the topic of the day relative to the meetings. I don't know if, you know, kind of when coming into here, my thought was like squaring away a time, and you know, today seems like it was it. But we had talked in the past about like, kind of like we did with the strategic plan. I mean, pretty much everyone, all the exec carved out a day and a half and talked about it. But coming in here, I thought like maybe it's 2 or 4 hours that the exec carves out, but maybe that's after the subcommittee kind of gives some information and we have some discussions about that, and then that subgroup or that exec committee carves out like 2 to 4 hours just to work through those difficult issues and make the votes that we need to make. Does that sound feasible? I don't know if that was clear, because I was just kind of thinking out loud, but.
That's totally explained. At least to give us a basis, as long as I'm not on.
Maybe we do a subcommittee and then we decide whether we need that time to have those discussions. I don't know. It's just, and maybe it's a quicker cadence because it's gonna come up quick to where it's like, oh, budgets are due again. And so maybe it's instead of waiting till October 22nd, we do one in August or early September or something like that.
Don't we have one the like initial budget meeting? It starts somewhere around January, right? Or when we're like.
You can't just start pinging me in December.
That's not very far away.
So how about this? We start a subcommittee relative to fund balance and innovation, like those 2 things. And we set another meeting beginning of September, because I think it seems hard until summer's over. People seem to be out.
Happy to work with the committee on fund balance. On innovation, but fund balance.
And I'll propose that Angie's on that subject.
Thank you.
Who else? I mean, Georgette, I'm guessing, must be on it.
I'd like to be on this.
I as well. So are you proposing create the subcommittee and then the subcommittee kind of goes up and
goals for their subcommittee based on innovation fund and fund balance. And then let them create their schedule as aggressive as it needs to be in order to bring back recommendations prior to the budget season starting to kick off.
Okay, there you go. Thanks for selling this.
I'd love to be a part of that.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah, and keeping the idea that the idea is to create some sort of framework for those two things, so that people can come into here and say like, I've submitted an innovation fund idea and it fits in this bubble, or we have fund balance and I want to make a request of the fund balance, or I want to ask for more, or we adjust it as we go along, or whatever. If that's the case, you hope that we're doing well so that growth fund goes up. Hope probation is doing well.
I was the other one.
Now,
Thank you. I look forward to seeing this updates work.
We're doing with all the research documents or the reports and things that everybody's supposed to be digesting.
so I'll send those out. And then I would say our next meeting, report out for the subcommittee, and we can take 10-15 minutes and discuss. I think the Diane Cummings one is like the starting point. And I can send them all out, so if you're just really wanting to, I think you can put them in AI and put your headphone in and it'll read it back to you, yeah.
I feel like they're all gonna be like really interesting dives. But probably 90% of the people aren't gonna go through each one, and like what we actually need out of each of those is a fairly limited thing. So I wonder if there's a way to synthesize like an overall executive summary for this.
I have to look, I think she does at the end of hers, I think it's like, she has a one pager, I think, like.
In the written document.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's just one example, like the LAO report on alignment's gonna have a ton of miscellaneous stuff.
But the spending on other counties I've used told us that it's time to look at. So.
Is that done or is it still being worked on?
Yes. There's a few tweaks. It's just, some of the stuff was rolled up, and just to clarify like how it was rolled up, by the. But it's all in columns and rows, and I should say. Okay, so we have our subcommittee. I'll send out all of the documents, like I said, and however you want to, like I said, if you want to use AI and plug it in there and it will give you a summary, feel free to put as much trust into that as you have for those things. Or if you want to read it, or all of them have an executive summary or some sort of summary attached to them. So you can read as much or as little as you feel you have the time or interest in it.
Just also attaching the county's fund balance policy. Whatever the slide there.
So just to make sure we're all on the same page. Subcommittee, we listed the members. They're going to set their own timetable and kind of discussion points relative to those two items, fund balance and the innovation funds. Come back, report out, we'll set a time in early September. And I'll send out those documents. The primary one that we'll have a discussion about is the Diane Cummings one that just talks specifically about our AB 109, 2011 realignment relative to the criminal justice population. And we'll have a short discussion on that in our September meeting. And any questions you might have. You'll see if Diane can zoom in and make special appearance.
Like 4 or 5 hours for that. It's gonna be long.
Any other, is that clear discussions? Makes sense in my head. I don't know if it does in everybody else's.
Like a good first step.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? Okay, public comment. Does Alliance, did you guys have any updates or anything that they wanted to share?
So, yeah.
Anyone else? Right, if we don't have anything else, can I get a motion to end the meeting? Bobby seconds it.
Second.
All those favor, aye. Thank you.